The well has spoken. The well is calling Adun's name. That scream ripped through the night of Akun Bayou village. People bolted upright, rushed to the square, bare feet slapping wet earth, eyes locked on the ancient well, where the water now blazed with a golden light, fierce as a sun buried at the bottom. They say if you lean over and look down, you'll see the reflection of a girl with long black hair spilling like ink, golden scales covering her legs, smiling up at whoever dares to stare. From that night on, the well was no longer just a well. It became rumor, then accusation. And in the middle of all those whispers stood Adun, the gentle daughter of the river, forced to face the entire village and pay for something she had never done. When the well has already spoken before any human mouth, does the truth still have a voice? Long, long ago, in an old African-American community tucked deep in the heart of Ekun Bayou Swamp, there was a village that lived by the breath of water. Every palm-thatched house faced the Duma River, the lifeblood of the village, flowing slow and lazy, curling around tall cottonwood trees whose roots sank deep into the mud. By day, sunlight struck the water and turned it blinding bright, like beaten copper. By night, the moon lay tilted on the river, the wind carrying the salt-sharp smell mixed with wet grass and cook-fire smoke, sounding like the far-off singing of ancestors. Water was life, a lullaby, the place where people entrusted memories and things too heavy to speak aloud. In that village, every joy and every sorrow began and ended at one ancient well, right in the middle of the square. The well was built from river stones hauled up by hand, worn smooth by generations of women carrying water. Every morning, before the sun could open its eyes, the women and girls were already circled around it, clay pots slung over their shoulders, laughing and talking like sparrows in a reed forest. The well was the heart of every story, the mirror that showed the village's true face, water clear on happy days, murky on sad ones. Some swore the well listened and remembered that if you lied at its edge, the echo would never answer back. But those were just old tales, passed around on nights the power went out, when children crowded close to the flicker of a kerosene lamp. That night, the night everything began, there was no wind. The moon was half swallowed by black clouds, and the whole village slept under a blanket of thick, wet air, heavy as rainy season heat. All you could hear were crickets sawing away, frogs rising from the mud, and the slow drip of water off the eaves onto cracked dirt. Everything was so quiet a snapped twig could stop a heart. Then someone screamed into the dark. "The well has spoken. The well is calling Adun's name." The scream cut the night like a flaming spear. Doors flew open, kerosene lamps trembling in every hand. Men, women, children poured into the square, bare feet slapping wet earth, eyes fixed on the well. The water inside was starting to glow slowly, like someone far below was lighting a lamp. The light wasn't white, wasn't gold, but both at once, fading into a shimmering fish-scale gleam. People leaned over, breath held. In the still mirror of the water, they saw their own faces staring back. But behind those reflections, something else smiled. A girl with soft black hair floating like seaweed, bare shoulders, and below the waist, not legs, but a golden-scaled fishtail flashing like 1,000 trapped sunbeams. Nobody spoke. They just looked at one another, eyes tangled with fear and suspicion. A breeze slid past. The lamps shivered. The light danced, and the tail in the well moved with it, as though it were really alive. A child burst into tears. A woman clapped her hand over its eyes. Then the crowd parted for Mama Falake, the woman whose hands were rough from a lifetime hauling water. Mother to the two girls the village talked about most, BC and Adun. Mama Falake knelt at the well's edge, peered down, then jerked her hand back as if burned. Her voice shook as she whispered a prayer in the old tongue, almost forgotten. No one caught the words, only saw her lips moving, soft as flowing water. When she lifted her head, the light in the well had gone out, leaving darkness thick as ash. People started murmuring, half believing, half afraid. Some said it was a good sign, rain coming after weeks of heat. Others said it was bad, the river spirits had come back to collect an old debt. From that night on, rumors spread like water no one could dam. Next morning at Mr. Bayo's tea stand, folks whispered. Whoever saw it says the shadow in the well was Adun Folaki's youngest. At the market, the fish sellers shook their heads. I always knew that beauty of hers wasn't natural. Children told each other that every night Adun sang by the river and fish gathered around her feet like ducklings after their mother. Each person added a little, embroidered a detail, and in 2 days the story had grown into a brand new legend, Adun, the golden-scaled mermaid of Ekun Bayou. No one could remember who said it first, but everyone was sure they'd heard it themselves. The well had spoken, the water had pointed. And once water speaks, who dares argue? In the little house by the riverbank, Adun went on as calm as ever. Every morning she rose early, took her clay jug, crossed the square, past the well. Eyes followed her like silent knives. She never looked back, only bowed her head, walked on, leaving behind the scent of soap and fresh morning wind. Her skin glowed like the river at dawn. Some said that glow was gold left by the water. Others said it was guilt not yet shaped. But she still smiled, gentle and quiet as a new day. Her older sister BC watched from a distance. Every time someone mentioned Adun's name, something twisted inside her chest. Once BC had been the one everyone praised, the one every man wanted to marry. Now, they only talked about Adun. She was jealous, and that jealousy was no longer a quiet seed. It had taken root in her heart, tangled like vines around the old well. When the rumors spread, BC neither denied nor confirmed them. She stayed silent, but in that silence her bitterness grew hour by hour. At night, when the village slept, she sat on the porch staring toward the well. The moon had slipped free of the clouds, shining clear on her tangled hair, sweeping across a face as dark and still as deep water. Far off, a frog croaked once and stopped. The air felt sucked dry of breath. She thought of her little sister, of Adun's innocent eyes, of that laugh, clear as spring water. Every memory cut like a small blade, and in the rustle of the wind she thought she heard a voice rising from the well. Those who belong to water cannot live with traitors. She startled, looked around, nobody there. Deep in the swamp, a faint roll of thunder trembled and died. The moon slid lower, laying a thin silver path across the well. BC didn't know if it was hallucination or warning. She only knew something cold and hungry had woken inside her. That night, the water in the well hadn't yet dried, but tomorrow it would begin to fall, and with the water would fall the trust of the entire village. And before we go on with the rest of the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Oh, and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. We love knowing that. Mornings in Ekun Bayou started with a lone rooster's cry, followed by the steady thud of wooden pestles pounding yam fufu. The air thickened with the smell of damp earth after a humid night, rotting cottonwood leaves, and cook fire smoke weaving together into a scent only those born from water truly know. Sunlight poured through the tall limbs of Iroko trees, sliding over thatched roofs and slipping into every little corner of the village like the curious hand of a child. Folks had been up for hours, but today every hushed conversation carried the same name, Adun. They said when the well first glowed, the very first face reflected wasn't anyone else's. It was hers, the girl with eyes bright as morning stars and skin that caught moonlight like a mirror. The elders called it a sign of blood chosen by the river. Others said no, God picks ordinary people. Maybe she carried strange lineage, half human, half water. Those words were dust dropped into clear water. Tiny, but enough to cloud it. BC heard them every single day, even though no one dared say it to her face. They just gave her sideways looks, half pity, half curiosity, like they were watching a cracked mirror that showed the wrong reflection. She'd known for a long time she was no longer the center of morning market chatter or the singing festivals under the Iroko tree. Every glance, every story, every song now carried her little sister's name. Adun, the one who made men freeze mid-drum beat and women suddenly uneasy when they caught their own faces in the river. Adun did nothing to steal that love. She simply lived, light as mist, resting on banana leaves. Mornings she fetched water, swept the house, combed Mama's hair. Afternoons she washed clothes by the river, her singing drifting into the air like smoke, so soft you couldn't tell if you were hearing music or running water. She was gentle to a fault, sometimes so gentle it made people feel guilty for envying her. But to BC, that gentleness was a dull blade. No blood, just endless cutting. In the village's memory, BC had once been the brightest girl alive. Every water drum festival, when she stepped into the circle wearing red cloth, the drums stopped. Even the wind held its breath. They used to say her eyes were sharp as a cane knife and could make any young man turn back for one more look. She grew up inside those praises, believing she was the only flower in a whole field of green rice. Then Adun grew up, and her beauty didn't just match. It swallowed BC's the way sunrise swallows sunset red. At first, BC tried to smile, tried to believe it would pass. But every time Adun laughed, every time the breeze lifted the hem of her skirt, another hairline crack opened inside BC, spreading slow like cracks in an old clay pot. She looked at Adun and didn't see a sister anymore. She saw her own shadow in the mirror. Prettier, brighter, yet still her, only everyone loved the shadow more than the real thing. Days rolled on and the rumors didn't quiet. They grew louder. At the market, people whispered they'd seen Adun standing in full sun, and the water on her skin didn't steam away. It glowed gold. One child swore he heard her singing from inside the well before dawn. Even the most level-headed folks started wondering. In small communities, gossip doesn't need proof. It only needs to be told enough times until it becomes shared memory. Mama Folake tried to keep peace in the house. Whenever she heard ugly talk, she just sighed. She knew her daughters the way she knew the river's heart. Adun was the surface, calm, reflecting everything, keeping nothing. BC was the bottom, dark, heavy, full of hidden currents. She knew one day the surface would touch the bottom, and when it did, both would break. Late afternoon, Adun sat by the window, slanting light turning her hair the color of honey. She wove a basket, fingers light, eyes staring far toward the river. In another corner of the house, BC watched her in silence. Between them only the call of birds and the creak of bamboo. The space was thin as thread, but neither crossed it. A bead of sweat slid from BC's neck down her chest, cold as a premonition. That evening, she stepped onto the porch and looked up. A 13-day moon hung round and low, mirrored on the river like a giant eye watching every sin. She heard water lapping the bank and pictured her sister down there, wet hair stuck to her neck, skin shining, golden tail flicking softly through the waves. The image was beautiful and painful, like a cut hidden in memory. She remembered years ago, when they were small, sitting together under the iroko waiting for Mama to come home from market. Little Adun had been skinny then, always holding tight to BC's hand, always asking, "Sister, are you tired?" That voice, those eyes, once made BC feel needed. Now she felt extra, like a rock on the bank the tide had forgotten. Deep in the night, the wind rose, leaves rustled like old spirits whispering. BC lay awake, tossing. The voice of the well in her memory refused to hush. It kept ringing. Water calling Adun's name, market whispers, praise, laughter, admiration. Every sound was a grain of sand dropping into her heart, piling up into desert. She closed her eyes, but behind her lids the golden scales still flashed like torches. Outside, the well was quiet, yet the air felt thick, ready to burst with rain. BC opened the door and walked out. Swamp smell hit her, damp, sweet, heavy. Fireflies drifted low around the fence, their lights blinking over old puddles like broken bits of mirror. She crossed the yard, past the patch where corn dried, all the way to the well's edge. Inside was only thick darkness. She looked down and saw her own face twisted by tiny ripples. For one heartbeat, she thought she saw someone else behind her reflection. Long hair, fishtail curling, blinding gold. Her heart slammed. She looked again, nothing but shattered moonlight. BC stood there a long time, until the sky paled toward dawn. Mist settled on her shoulders, cold as tears. Inside her, something had begun. Not quite hate, not quite fear, but a hunger to watch her sister fall, just to prove the world could still be fair. The water didn't reflect that wish, but maybe it heard. Next morning, the Duma River started dropping. Just a little. Nobody noticed yet. But the women fetching water said the level was lower than usual. Old tree stumps were showing on the riverbed. The well suddenly turned cloudy. No light bounced back anymore. Folks said mud had stirred it up, but Mama Lake knew water only clouds when hearts cloud first. That morning, sunlight scattered gold over the low rooftops, soaking into every leaf, every stand of reeds along the Duma River bank. The smell of fresh mud rose with cook fire smoke, blending into the sweet dampness of the air. From far off came the steady beat of the morning drum, regular as the village's own heartbeat. But louder than the drum were the whispers. Voices slipped through fences, trailed down narrow paths, slid under every porch roof. Every story started with the same name, Adun. The man mending nets said last night he dreamed of a giant fish wearing a golden crown, smiling with a girl's mouth. At the tea stand, the old men swore they saw a shimmer deep in the well at midnight. Mothers hauling water paused, glanced at one another. The water in their buckets rocked and mirrored their fear. A child ran past, shouting he'd heard the well call Adun's name. Nobody laughed, nobody argued. Rumor, like morning mist, crept into every breath, every prayer. By noon, the sun stood straight overhead. Cicadas screamed thick as a hot curtain draped over the village. At the market, among the smells of dried fish and palm oil, the tale of the golden-scaled mermaid became the fastest traded thing with no price. People repeated it, each adding a detail. Adun could breathe underwater. When she sang, the river rose higher. The well itself was where she met her father, the river's own spirit. Truth dissolved. Only curiosity and fear remained, echoing. Adun knew none of it. She worked the same as always, fetched water, smiled at familiar faces, but her smiles weren't returned anymore. People looked away. Conversations died when she passed, then started again in lowered voices. The well was still full, yet each time she peered in, her reflection seemed fainter, as if the water itself had begun to doubt the girl looking down. Mama Lake felt the change in the air. She watched her daughters quietly, heart heavy. Every evening she built a small fire on the porch, listened to wind threading through the old walls, felt the house growing colder. BC sat silent by the doorway, lips pressed tight, eyes clouded. A strange feeling, half triumph, half regret, slipped into her like smoke. She didn't want harm for her sister, but every time she heard Golden Mermaid whispered, the ache in her chest eased a little, as if those words could tip the scales back level. Late afternoon, clouds stacked thick. Wind came hard from the west, carrying salt and the sour smell of old water. Ekun Bayou sank into dim, gray-green light, everything coated in sadness. The Duma lay quieter than usual, its surface flat as a mirror, reflecting the skinny Iroko trees. Adun walked to the riverbank, set her clay jug down. She looked into the water and saw herself mixed with sky and cloud. From somewhere far off, someone called her name, but when she turned, there was only wind and grass brushing together. No one. She knelt, scooped water, and suddenly, in the fading light, the water in her jug flashed pale gold. She froze, tilted her head. Where had that light come from? The sun was already behind the trees. No ray could reach. Then the water cleared again, as if she had imagined it. Adun shook her head, but a faint unease rose in her. She hurried home with the jug, unaware that eyes were watching every step. BC stood on the little rise behind the hill. She saw it all. The flash of gold, her sister bending over the river. It wasn't clear, but it was enough to wake the deepest doubts inside her. What if every rumor was true? What if the well had shown the truth after all? Against the wind, the water's smell carried a metallic bite that stung her nose. BC's heart pounded, and a dark thought took shape. If the rumors were true, she would be the first to expose them. Only then would Adun's shadow finally leave her life. Night fell fast, clouds thick as ash, sealing the sky. Frogs filled the silence. In the little house, the oil lamp painted BC's face, picking out every tense vein on her wrists. She sat straight-backed, staring out, waiting. In the next room, Adun slept, breath steady, face peaceful. Water dripped from the eaves in perfect rhythm, like something counting down. BC leaned her head against the wall, felt the chill soak into her skin, and inside her the thin flame of jealousy flared again. No longer ash, but a quiet, steady burn eating away every last hesitation. Next morning, as the sun rose, the village buzzed. Someone said the Duma River had glowed in the night, water turning pale gold and bubbling. Another swore they saw a figure walking the bank, long hair touching the surface. Story fed story until an invisible wave rolled through Ekin Bayou. Well, river, moon, golden scales, everything melted into one complete tale no one needed to trace to its beginning. They only needed to believe. And they did. Late that afternoon, Adun crossed the square, clay jug swaying gently on her shoulder. No one greeted her. Women pounding yam froze, pestles hanging in midair, children racing, bicycle tires went silent. The air turned thick as fog. She walked slowly, the scent of water trailing her into every alley. BC stood nearby, watching her sister with eyes tangled in love and fear. The last sunlight struck Adun's face and her skin reflected a soft gold, as if thinly plated with metal. The sight made everyone step back. That night, when the moon rose, the well glowed again. This time no one came close. The golden light pulsed like breath from something far below. People only stood at a distance, hands clasped, murmuring prayers. No one dared speak Adun's name aloud, but everyone thought it. Rumor was no longer talk. It had become faith, truth witnessed by water itself. On the porch, BC sat staring into the dark, listening to wind move through the trees. She knew tomorrow the village would no longer be at peace. Water can bring life, but it can also wash everything away. And in that moment, she wasn't sure whether she wanted the river to rise or to run dry. Night fell over Ekin Bayou like a thick, sodden blanket of damp and darkness. No wind, no insects, only a silence so heavy you could hear your own heart thump. Oil lamps threw weak light against bamboo walls, painting shadows that shivered like they were scared of themselves. Far off, the familiar trickle of the Duma River suddenly stopped. The whole village looked up at the same moment. That stillness wasn't peace. It was the held breath of something huge about to burst. Then the ground trembled. People spilled from their houses, lamps swinging, light spilling over red dirt paths. From the river came a thick, fishy stink, no longer the smell of water, but of something dying slow. Wind swept through the reeds, carrying dry, rattling gasps. When they reached the bank, the Duma, the wide, gentle river, was nothing but cracked earth. The water had vanished overnight, leaving bare mud and stranded fish flopping weakly under moonlight. An old woman cried out, voice raw with terror. Never. Never has the river dried in one night. The crowd stood frozen. In their terrified eyes, a fragile, spider-thin belief began to knot itself together. They didn't say it, but they all thought the same thing. This had to do with Adun. Next morning, the sun rose slow, its light spreading over cracked ground. Hot wind roared, whipping dust into waves. People ran everywhere with buckets and pots hunting water. But the well in the square was bone dry, just a few dead frogs lying on the bottom. Water in buckets turned to steam in minutes. Children cried with cracked lips. The village felt like one giant body dying of thirst. At the center of the crowd, Mama Folake knelt by the well, calloused hands clawing the dirt. She dug deeper, praying for a trace of dampness, but found only sand and dust. Her voice broke as she begged, "Let the river come back. Let the water forgive us." No answer. White clouds drifted high overhead, too lazy to block the sun. By noon, the men gathered under the iroko tree. Their voices were hoarse from thirst, but their talk burned like hot coals. One said Adun was the reason the river raged. Another nodded, claiming she had stolen the spirit of the water by hiding her golden tail beneath human skin. Someone swore he'd seen that glow on her legs. Word by word, like stones dropped into still water, they created ripples of fear and hate. When hearts run dry, reason is the first thing to crack. Adun sat inside the house, hearing every sound through the thin bamboo walls. She didn't come out. She didn't cry. Her eyes stared at the window where sunlight fell in weak golden streaks. The air stank of dried mud, thick enough to choke on. She understood. Not just the water was draining away, but people's trust too. Late afternoon, dust choked everything. The village looked covered in ash. They still had no explanation for the strange drought except blame. In places starving for water, the one who looks different is always suspected first. As the sun slanted, BC stepped outside. Wind slapped her face with salt and the stench of dead fish. She nearly gagged. She stared at the empty riverbed and felt ice inside her chest. Her jealousy no longer tasted sweet like victory. It tasted bitter as mud. That evening, the village gathered around the dry well. Fires flickered over exhausted, burning faces. Papa Ajani, the oldest man, stood, voice shaking with weakness yet loud as a drum. The river has left us. We must find the cause. If we don't, water will never return. His words hit the dry ground like breaking bone. A woman sobbed that it had to be the anger of the water spirits. Another pointed toward Folake's house, voice ripping the air. Ever since the well called Adun's name, the river changed its path. Don't you see? The crowd surged, whispers turning to shouts. BC stood among them, fists clenched white. In that moment, she could have spoken, defended her sister, stopped the madness. But the words stuck in her throat, because part of her still wanted to believe Adun truly was different. Her silence cut like a second blade, making the mob bolder. That night, the moon rose blood red, shining into the empty well, light rolling over dry stones. A man leaned in and claimed he saw gold flashing at the bottom. Everyone rushed forward with lamps. It was only firelight reflected, but in their panic they took it as proof. "She's hiding the water's gold," someone yelled. "She's drinking our river dry." The shouts tore into the night like startled birds. Mama Folake ran forward, falling to her knees. "That's my child, she's never harmed anyone." But the crowd didn't listen. When fear and thirst mix, mercy becomes a luxury. BC stood behind, eyes wide, watching her mother, watching familiar faces twisted by despair. She saw Adun step onto the porch. Moonlight swept through sweat-wet hair and turned it pure gold. That sight was the last match dropped on oil. A fierce wind rose, whipping dust and dead leaves. The village stepped back, but suspicion had already crossed the line of reason. Someone threw a stone into the well. It echoed dull and deep. At the same moment, a huge bird flapped overhead, its shadow crossing the well and making the gold flicker like it was real. That was enough! The roar went up. "Grab her!" BC stumbled backward, legs shaking. She didn't know if she wanted to stop them or let it happen. Adun retreated inside, eyes shining like the last 2 drops of water left on earth. For one heartbeat, she and BC looked at each other, a look holding all their childhood, all the jealousy, all the love still left. Then the mob surged forward. They smashed the door, clubs raised high. The sky cracked with a dry, distant thunder, like stone bones breaking. Just before chaos swallowed everything, BC thought she heard water dripping somewhere, such a fragile sound it might have been imagination. The river was gone, but water had never been silent. It was only listening, waiting for people to pronounce their own sentence. And now, dear viewers, pause for a second to hit that subscribe button before we dive into the heart of the story, but only if what I'm sharing truly moves you. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. It's amazing to see people from all over the world joining us. That noon, the sun poured over Ekun Bayou like red-hot blades. The village was bone dry, no wind, no trace of moisture. The ground split open, grass withered dead, the sky hanging like a blinding mirror, reflecting the thirst and madness in every pair of eyes. Dust, sweat, and fear mixed into an air so heavy breathing hurt. On the square, around the ancient well, the crowd had already gathered. They stood shoulder to shoulder, lips cracked, eyes sunken, and in every one of those eyes burned the same obsession: water. Adun was led into the circle. No one spoke. Their feet crunched on dry earth like breaking bones. She walked barefoot, her thin cotton dress clinging with sweat, long hair half hiding her face. Sunlight struck her skin and turned it a soft gold, making the closest people step back. Some shuddered, unsure if it was a trick of the light or the gleam of hidden scales. BC stood at the edge of the crowd, fists clenched, sweat running down her spine, heart hammering. Papa Ajani, the elder, stood on the well's rim, voice raw but still carrying like an old drum. "We have thirsted too long. The river is gone, the well is gone. If the water truly belongs to her, let her give it back." His words fell onto cracked ground and shattered into 1,000 echoes. The crowd rippled like a wave. A man threw a stone into the empty well. It thudded dull and deep, then silence swallowed everything. That silence felt like the whole village bowing to an unseen terror. Adun lifted her head. In her eyes, light shattered like broken mirror. She didn't cry, she didn't beg. Her breathing was steady, soft as steam rising from a clay pot. She spoke, voice so low only those nearest heard, like water murmuring underground. "If I am a child of the water," she said, "why has the water left you while I am still here?" No one answered. Her words drifted up, thinned, and vanished like mist in the heat. The crowd went dead still, only ragged breathing and the rustle of dry cloth as someone shifted. BC stared at her sister. The calm in those eyes terrified her. Not because she believed Adun was something else, but because that very kindness made everyone else feel small. For one heartbeat, BC wanted to run forward, grab her hand, say anything to stop this madness. But her feet were rooted, heavy as stone. A child suddenly wailed, the cry ripping across the square. People flinched, then, as if spellbound, whispers turned to shouts. "She's the river's daughter!" someone yelled. "She's the one drinking the water dry," another roared. The words were sparks on dry straw. In an instant, the crowd became a flood of bodies. Sticks rose, ropes swung, desperate hands reached for someone, anyone to pay for nature's crime. Mama Folake threw herself forward, kneeling between them, old arms spread wide to shield her daughter. Her voice cracked. "Stop this. My baby has done nothing." But the mob no longer heard. When people thirst too hard, they stop knowing what's real. BC saw her mother fall, dust billowing like smoke, saw Adun bend to help her, hands blazing bright under the sun. That glow made the crowd recoil. Someone screamed, "See? Golden scales. She's not human." Chaos exploded. People surged. For a moment, BC saw only tumbling bodies, raised arms, choking dust, shouts blending into a bloodthirsty storm. She heard her mother cry out. Someone hit the ground, then every sound drowned in blinding light. At the center of it all stood Adun, hair flying, eyes wide, gaze not afraid but full of pity. Sunlight swept over her, coating her skin in blinding gold. With every step she took backward, the earth seemed to soften beneath her feet. From a crack, a thin jet of water spurted, then vanished into the air before anyone could be sure they'd seen it. She turned toward the well, reached out, fingers brushing the dry stone rim, a gesture light as greeting, light as goodbye. A breeze passed, carrying the faint smell of salt water. Everyone held their breath. To BC, the moment stretched, everything suspended under the blazing sky. She saw a bead of sweat on Adun's temple sparkle like water, saw the dust smeared on her sister's hands, saw the gentleness in those eyes, the gentleness that once made her jealous and now made her want to fall to her knees. She started forward, but a shout behind her froze her. "Hold her!" Ropes flew. Sunlight flashed white along the cords. It happened too fast. They looped the ropes around Adun's body and yanked tight. She didn't fight, only tilted her head, eyes still calm as a river that had never known waves. One hard pull and she dropped to her knees. Dust exploded, clinging to her glowing skin like ash on gold. High above, the sun glared mercilessly. Shadows of people and ropes tangled on the ground like a giant net. BC stood frozen, hands shaking. In that instant, she understood she had gone too far. Understood that even if every drop of water returned, her own heart would stay parched forever. But it was too late. When the ropes cinched the final time, a sound rose, not human, but the groan of earth splitting. The ground trembled. Far off, a low, dry thunder rolled, the promise of a storm that hadn't yet formed. The crowd stumbled back, half terrified, half amazed, yet no one let go. Adun was dragged away, dust rising in clouds. At the edge of the square, BC collapsed, shoulders heaving. Through the shouting and the searing light, she heard the dry well whisper again, faint, almost imagined. When the water leaves, what remains in people's hearts is the truth. Dusk settled over Ekun Bayou like a handful of ash scattered across the rooftops. The last rays of sun shattered into burning glass. Wind carried the stench of baked mud, cook fire smoke, and human sweat, trapped with nowhere to go. In the middle of the square, the ancient well lay gutted, its cracked stones webbed like a spider's trap. Rope looped the well's neck, the other end staked deep, and there sat Adun, wrists bound, hair falling across half her face. Dying light slid over her skin and turned it a heartbreaking pale gold. She said nothing. She looked at no one. Only her shadow stretched long across the cracked earth, thin as the ghost of the river. The whole village ringed her. They were quiet, eyes sunken, faces burned dark by sun. The silence wasn't calm. It was the weight of a sky about to collapse. At the back, Papa Ajani, the oldest man alive, limped forward on his stick, each step dragging seasons of rain and drought behind him. His faded cloth hung loose. His voice was gravel, yet it carried slow and clear like a funeral drum. "We were born from water," he said, "and water raised us. But now water has walked away. The river is dead. The well is empty. Something has angered the spirit of the Duma. If we do not find it, Ekun Bayou will vanish." His words soaked into hearts like hot coals dropped into cold ash. Someone answered, "We already found it. That girl carries a golden tail." The light coming off her scared the water away. Heads nodded. Another voice rose. "Throw her into the old riverbed and the water will come back." Murmurs followed, frantic, like rain that only falls in dreams. Mama Falake dropped to her knees in front of the well, hands shaking. "That's my daughter," she whispered. "Born right here among us, under the same moon as every one of your children. Have you forgotten how she carried water for your houses? How she broke her bread to feed your hungry babies?" Her voice cracked in the wind, then broke into sobs. Tears hit the dirt and refused to sink, leaving only white salt tracks. BC stood at the edge, fingers ice cold. She saw her mother kneeling, her sister sitting, the village bowed. Everything moved slow, warped, as if seen through dirty water. Memories collided inside her. Adun's laugh by the river, Mama's eyes while mending clothes, the praise that once belonged only to her. She opened her mouth to speak, but her throat was sand. Wind hissed past her ears, and inside it she heard the old voice from the well that night. "Those who belong to water cannot live with traitors." Papa Ajani cleared his throat and stared straight at Adun. "If you are truly innocent, pray for the river to bear witness. If water does not return by sunrise, you will answer for it. We have no other path." The words struck final as a stone dropped into the void. Every eye turned to her. She lifted her head. Hair fell away from her face. In the sunset, her eyes held a strange light. No fire, no fear, only the reflection of something farther than sky. Her voice came soft and even, like wind through reeds. "You drank the river's water, lived by its breath. When the river thirsted, none of you brought it drink. Now you thirst and blame me. If the river is angry, I am only one drop inside it." No one answered. Her words thinned and vanished on the hot air. A man swung his arm and shouted, "Devil talk! Don't listen!" The shout spread, drowned the wind, turned into a roar. The village surged forward, sticks raised, ropes ready. They no longer wanted reason. They wanted water. Water to wash away fear. Water to forgive themselves. BC watched familiar faces twist into something ugly. Eyes that once smiled at her now glowed like coals. A child beside his mother trembled and asked something, but was yanked away. In that moment, she knew the village was no longer a village. It had become one huge creature that only knew thirst, ready to swallow its own daughter for the chance of rain. Papa Ajani lifted a hand. The crowd slowed. His voice dropped low. "We wait until sunrise. If dawn comes and the water has not returned, we will offer her to the old riverbed. It is the only way to beg forgiveness." A single nod rippled through them, heavy as a curse. They drove stakes beside the well and tied her fast. Beneath her, tiny stranded fish had already dried to husks. Wind blew, dust clung to her skin like gray ash. Adun did not struggle. She tilted her head to the sky and watched the new moon rise, small, pale, cold, staring down at human fate. Mama Folake was dragged away, still calling her daughter's name in broken breaths. BC could not look at her mother, could not look at her sister. She stared at the moon instead and saw its light strike her own hair, then spill across Adun's skin in the same pale gold. The glow blinded her. She turned away, guilt rising like floodwater in her chest, but she dared not breathe loud enough for anyone to hear her shaking. Night came. Fires were lit around the square. Red flames danced in 100 eyes like drops of water set alight. Slow drums began, each beat a hammer against the heart. Children slept on their mothers' backs. Old people sat motionless. Everyone waited for morning the way condemned men wait for the blade. BC sat apart, leaning against the old Iroko. Cold wind, smell of ash and sweat. Through the dark, she watched her sister motionless under the moon, light haloing her like something holy. In that moment, she no longer knew if Adun was human or water, sister or dream. Only that her own heart hurt, not from jealousy, not even from regret, but from the knowledge that what was happening could never be undone. The night crawled. Every minute stretched like the rope around Adun's body. Wind moaned down the well's throat, a low, hollow lament from the earth itself. Someone swore they heard water calling, but when they listened, there was only the roll of dry sand. When the first pale blade of dawn cut through the trees, no one spoke. The well was still dry, the riverbed still empty. Eyes met, exhausted but hard. Papa Ajani nodded once. "It is time." His words cracked like distant thunder. BC closed her eyes, fingers digging into her palms, heart tangled like knotted rope. Somewhere, a bird gave one hoarse, feeble cry. A new day had begun, but no one believed there was water left anywhere to wash their sins clean. The earnings on the third day came to Ekun Bayou without a trace of moisture in the air. The sky was a dull gray, light filtered through thick glass, and the ground split open with fresh, jagged scars like dried blood. Children woke with lips split wide, their cries nothing more than rasping whimpers. Men sat motionless on porches, eyes vacant, ropes coiled around their hands like badges of blind justice. Women carried empty clay pots back and forth past the well, searching in vain for any drop left in the stones. There was no longer the smell of water, only hot sand and cold ash. In the square where Adun was bound, the sun's shadow crept like a heated blade. She sat still, eyes half closed, face unnaturally calm. Her skin had dried, yet still caught the light in faint gold, like dust beaten into metal. Wind passed. Her thin dress fluttered with a dry rustle, the ghost of old waves. People avoided her gaze, afraid that glow might expose the guilt in their own eyes. Mama Folake sat against a tree trunk, arms wrapped around her head, hair matted with sweat and dust. Each time she looked at her daughter, she trembled, but she had no tears left. She only whispered worn-out prayers, calling the river, calling the ancestors. The wind stole every word. No one heard. No answer came. BC sat not far away. She hadn't slept in 3 days. Every time she closed her eyes, she dreamed the well, the golden light beneath the water, Adun's face when the ropes went tight. She heard the river murmuring in her ears, sometimes water, sometimes her sister's voice. Everything tangled like wet cobweb, but the rain never came. On the third afternoon, the wind shifted. The stench of baked mud grew heavy as rusted iron. The sky darkened, clouds thickening, but they were not rain clouds, just dense gray rolls like smoke from a great burning. Children pointed upward, mouths open in fear. Grown-ups stood silent, afraid to hope. The sun vanished, yet the heat clung to skin, smoldering like dying coals. Papa Ajani limped into the square, leaning hard on his stick. His voice was shredded but heavy. 3 days and the water has not returned. Perhaps the spirit of the Duma wants the offering complete. Heads bowed, no one argued. Faith and despair had fused inside them, thick and bitter. They looked at Adun no longer with hate, only fear. Fear of her, fear of water, fear of themselves. BC turned away. She couldn't bear those eyes. She walked the dry bed of what had been the Duma. Beneath her feet, the earth cracked, each step snapping like breaking bone. Rotting fish stench filled her nose, reminding her water had once lived here. Scattered across the ground lay brittle shells, witnesses to betrayal. She bent, picked one up, ran a thumb over its sharp edge, then flung it far. The shell struck dust with a sound like swallowed crying. When she turned back, she saw the well. Standing beside it was Adun, or perhaps only her shadow. The ropes hung loose, hair wild, last light pouring over her shoulders until her whole body glowed soft gold. BC froze, not trusting her eyes. A small breeze rose, and in it she heard a faint call, real or imagined, she couldn't tell. Sister. The voice was gentle as flowing water and turned her heart to ice. She walked closer, legs trembling. A few steps away, the figure thinned, melted into the sunset, leaving only a cool trace of moisture in the air. BC fell to her knees at the well's edge and looked down into black nothing. For the first time in days, she saw a drop, one single drop, slide down a stone and fall. The tiny sound rang through the silence like the first note of a prayer. Night came. Fires were lit again, weak and smoking. The village lay scattered across the square, mouths dry, eyes closed, but no one sleeping. BC leaned against the old Iroko, fingers clawing dirt. She heard whispers all around, not human, but the earth breathing, the well groaning. In the dark, she thought of her sister of days they bathed in the river laughing, of the first night the well glowed, of her own silence, each memory cut like a blade into stone, impossible to erase. Near midnight, the wind changed again. From the well, a faint light rose. BC opened her eyes. In that light stood Adun, clearer than ever, standing straight, ropes fallen away, eyes wide and reflecting fire. Across her legs, golden scales blazed patch by patch, dazzling as shattered sun. The sight was so beautiful it made fear impossible. BC rose, took one step, but dared not speak her name. Then Adun turned. Her gaze brushed her sister's gentle, the same as always. A tired, forgiving smile flickered. She bent to the well, whispered something no one heard. Instantly the light vanished. The square plunged into darkness. The wind died. A small sound rose drop. One drop, then two, then three. Steady water falling, mingling with the earth's trembling breath. Next morning, the village woke to dew, covering everything. On the grass, tiny crystal drops sparkled like broken glass. Someone shouted, voice raw, "Water! The water is back!" People rushed out, catching dew on palms, drinking, crying, laughing. But the well was still empty, the riverbed still dry. It was only enough to wet lips, enough to feed a dying hope. BC looked everywhere for her sister. The place where Adun had been tied was empty. The rope lay slack, its end soaked dark. She knelt, touched it, cold moisture seeped into her skin, salty as tears. A strange certainty rose in her. Adun had not left. She had simply dissolved into the air, into the dew, reminding them that water was still listening. When the sun climbed, its light struck the well, and for one heartbeat reflected pale gold before fading. The entire village knelt in silence. No one spoke, but something in their eyes had shifted, fear slowly turning to remorse. BC looked up at the sky and saw a thin cloud drifting past, shaped like an arm reaching out of water. She didn't know if it was blessing or warning. She only knew that inside her a small current had begun to melt, warm and sharp like water, finding its way back to a human heart. All right, my dear viewers, if you're watching and loving this story, drop a 1-inch the comments or just say I'm still here so we can keep going together. That morning, the sky over Ekun Bayou wore a dull silver gray, like an old net soaked in ash. Clouds hung heavy and motionless, as if the whole world were holding its breath. Women on their way to the early market stopped in the road and looked up. Not a breath of wind, yet the reed fields rustled softly, as though the earth itself were whispering. No one spoke, but the same fragile thread of hope flickered in every pair of eyes. Maybe the water was coming back. The ancient well was still empty, yet on its stone rim a thin mist rose, cool and damp, as if an unseen hand had just brushed it. The stones felt cold to the touch, faintly wet. The villagers gathered around, peering into the black throat below. They no longer shouted, no longer accused, they only waited, silent as people awaiting judgment. On the ground lay Adun's rope, limp and soaked through. BC stood at the very back, arms wrapped around herself, eyes blurred from 3 sleepless nights. Inside her, a strange fear mixed with a lightness she could not name. Her sister had vanished or perhaps returned to the place she truly belonged. BC looked toward the old riverbed of the Duma, now nothing but cracked scars. Dawn light slid across them and the cracks gleamed like hundreds of small golden snakes writhing beneath the soil. She closed her eyes and heard, faint but real, the whisper of flowing water on the wind. The first cry came from the bank. A barefoot boy came running, voice cracking with excitement. "Water! There's water!" The crowd surged toward the old Duma. There, in the shattered riverbed, a thin jet spurted up, weak but real, then another and another, threading together like veins desperate to live. The ground trembled. From deep below, water burst forth, boiling, roaring like a drum of triumph. The village fell to its knees, shouts of joy tangled with sobs. They scooped water over faces, hair, hands, letting the coolness wash over them like forgiveness. It tasted salty, the salt of tears, the salt of guilt. To them, it was the sweetest thing on earth. They embraced, collapsed to the ground, mouths moving in thanks to the river goddess Duma. Amid the rejoicing, BC stood still. Water rose around her ankles, icy, climbing to her knees. She looked into the new current and saw pale gold shimmering beneath the surface, flickering like 1,000 tiny lamps. No one else noticed, only she did, because only she knew it was her sister's trace. Through the roar of water, she heard the familiar voice, soft as breath. "Sister, forgive yourself." She broke. For the first time since the river dried, tears poured from her eyes and mingled with the reborn Duma. They ran clear, no longer tasting of guilt. The water rose fast, sweeping dust from houses, ash from roofs, hatred from hearts. In hours, Ekunbayu shed its burned skin and turned green again, as if it had never thirsted. Papa Ajani knelt at the bank, trembling as he dipped his hands and lifted them to his lips. "The water has returned," he whispered, voice breaking. "The goddess has forgiven us." But in his old eyes lay sorrow. He knew this mercy had not fallen from the sky. It had come from a soul that dissolved into water to save them. He looked toward the well, where faint light still glowed from the stones, and bowed his head low. That same day, the village held a Thanksgiving rite. No drums, no songs, only the sound of flowing water and murmured prayers. Women set white flowers on the current. Petals drifted away, catching sunlight in streaks of gold like fish scales. Children ran along the bank, feet splashing, laughing loud. An old woman splashed water over her head and laughed through her tears. She saved us. BC knelt alone at the water's edge. Sunset poured across the river, turning it blazing gold. For an instant, she saw a shape glide past, soft curve, long hair streaming with the current. A golden tail flicked once, then melted into the waves. She held her breath, then smiled through tears. "You're really home." Wind rose, carrying salt, mud, and the clean smell of life. Iroko leaves shivered like singing. Droplets splashed up and settled on BC's cheeks, sparkling like tiny grains of gold. With every drop, the earth softened, the grass greened, the Duma lived again. Night came. Moonlight spilled silver across the village. The water gleamed calm as the sleep of the newly pardoned. On rooftops, dew gathered and rolled down the wood, drip, drip like quiet music. Everyone sank into deep sleep, lulled by the river's song. BC stayed awake. She sat on the bank, eyes following the moonlit ripples. There, in the waves, she saw Adun's face, gentle smile, clear eyes, hair drifting like current. She did not flinch, did not fear. She only bowed her head slowly, in greeting. Then she whispered, "Little sister, I will tell this story so no one ever forgets the water, forgets mercy, and forgets you." A soft breeze passed. On the surface, one last blaze of gold flared bright, then vanished. The Duma grew still again, peaceful, as though it had never known a storm. Weeks after the saving rain, Ekun Bayou rose again as if the terrible thirst had never happened. The earth softened, grass grew thick and green, wildflowers spilled over the riverbanks. The Duma flowed gentle once more, carrying away old mud and bringing back the sweet, wet smell of life. By day, children's laughter rang through the village again. By night, oil lamps threw trembling halos onto the water, scattering light like fallen stars. Yet in the middle of all that joy lay a strange hush, a silence shaped like the girl who had vanished with the water. The people called it the blessing, but few dared speak Adun's name. Only when telling children about the miracle did they lower their voices, as if afraid the river might hear. There was a girl, they said, who paid with herself so the river could live. The story spread. Every flood season added a detail. Sometimes she became a golden fish. Sometimes she slept in the river's heart. Sometimes the moonlight was her eyes looking up from below. Every telling mixed fear with gratitude. As for BC, from the day the water returned, she lived quietly, like someone waking from a long dream. Every morning she fetched water from the river as before, but she never looked into the well again. Every night she sat on the Duma's bank, listening to the water lap, the shore, and in that sound she heard something familiar. At first it was only a murmur, then it became a melody. A wordless song, soft and sad, like wind slipping through open palms. She thought she imagined it, then others heard it too. They said on full moon nights a faint singing rose from the river, sometimes close, sometimes far. Some claimed it was the goddess Duma herself. Others swore it was the soul of Adun, the girl with golden scales. Whoever it was, no one went near. They only knelt on the bank, left a few flowers, bowed, and gave thanks. BC sat for hours, hands buried in soft mud, eyes following broken moonlight on the waves. Inside her, regret and love flowed together in a quiet current. She knew the water had forgiven. She had not yet forgiven herself. Every night she came, bringing a small bowl of rice, setting it on the bank, and whispering, "For you." Then she stepped back and watched the river take the offering, and a strange peace rose in her chest. One night, when the moon was perfectly round and the river lay like a giant mirror, BC came again. She sat down, the breeze was gentle, the water rippled. From the middle of the river, a slender column of gold light rose, soft as breath. BC stopped breathing. In that light stood a woman's shape, long hair touching the waves, eyes bright and kind as the new moon. On her lower half, golden scales shimmered, moving with the current. No words were spoken, yet BC understood. She was saying, "I'm still here." The first tear fell from BC's eyes, slipped into the river, and sent out a tiny ring of waves. "Little sister," she whispered, "I've heard your song. From now on, I'll tell the story so no one ever forgets." The wind passed, carrying cool water scent and forest flowers. The gold light faded, the figure thinned, leaving only the river smooth as glass beneath the moon. BC stayed until the moon waned and the singing stopped. Next morning, the villagers found a strand of golden beads lying on the grass by the bank. No one knew where it came from. BC picked it up. The last bead held a tiny swirl like a frozen scale. She put it around her neck, and from that day on, the river's song never frightened her again. From then on, every high-water season BC taught the children the Song of Duma, a wordless tune made only of sounds like water lapping. They called it the Song of Forgiveness. When night fell, it floated through the village, blending with waves, frogs, wind, becoming the music of souls finally at rest. People say that song keeps the Duma from ever running dry again. And BC, the sister scarred by jealousy and guilt, became the keeper of the well and watcher of the river. She lived to old age, hair white as sand, yet every night she walked to the bank, bowed to the water, and slept. Each time the wind rose, the river answered with a gentle swell shaped like a hand waving back. When BC died, they buried her on the Duma's bank, where soft grass and white flowers bloom year-round. The village well was rebuilt. Its water stayed clear forever. On moonlit nights, people swear they still hear two voices twining together, one husky, one crystal, talking the way water talks to itself. Ekun Bayou tells the story down the generations. They no longer speak of the golden mermaid with fear, but with gratitude. They call her daughter of the water, the one who gave the river breath again, and taught humans the lesson of mercy. And on quiet nights, when the surface mirrors the moon like a perfect glass, if you pass by Ekun Bayou and lean close to look, you might see two figures, an old woman with silver hair and a girl with a golden tail, smiling side by side beneath the water. Night draped Ekun Bayou like a silk scarf, wind carrying cool mist and the scent of wildflowers from the river's edge. A perfect moon poured silver over the Duma, the water rippled with scales of light, as though a great fish were turning in its sleep. The village lay quiet, only the river talking to the wind, whispering the old story one time cannot swallow, because it has melted into every dewdrop, every breath of the earth. On the riverbank, where soft grass grew around BC's grave, moonlight fell in bright ribbons. The small mound, covered in white flowers and reeds, seemed to breathe. At its foot, the Duma murmured over old stones, soft and low, like a mother singing her child to sleep. From a distance, you might think the water itself was singing. And it was. The song of souls washed clean, the song of forgiveness. In the heart of the river, where moonlight gathered brightest, a figure rose gently. Adun, daughter of water, the one who once wore a golden tail and a heart too kind for the world. She had not aged, had not faded. Each time the current moved, she moved. Each time the wind rose, her hair followed. Her eyes were still gentle, but deeper now, holding the riverbed and the sky at once. She brushed the surface with her fingertips, sending rings of waves outward farther than any human ear could follow. From the far bank, the wind carried BC's voice, warm and rough, rising from the earth itself. You did what I never dared. You taught them and you taught me that water can run dry, but mercy must never be allowed to. Adun smiled. The smile caught the moon and lit the whole river. Sister, she whispered, every soul has its own current. You became the well of memory where anyone who comes can look in and see what they still lack. The wind rose, carrying their song. No one could tell if it came from water, from air, or from the two sisters braided together. The melody drifted through the village, slipped under every window, entered the dreams of the sleeping. In those dreams, people saw the well glowing, water overflowing, and two women sitting side by side, one silver-haired, one black-haired, laughing together. From that time on, every year at the last full moon, the village holds the Festival of Golden Water, not to worship, but to remember. They carry water from the Duma, pour it into the ancient well, then sing BC's old wordless song, only the sound of water, slow drums, and the shuffle of bare feet. Children scatter white and gold petals on the current. They drift away, shining under moonlight. They believe that when the water sings, Adun smiles. The elders say on certain strange nights, when the moon hangs low, the river flashes metallic gold, as though plated. They say it is proof the daughter of water still guards the village, still listens to every prayer. And those who once wronged another, if they kneel at the well and look, they will not see their own face, but the face of the one they hurt. Water never forgets, yet water never takes revenge. It only reflects truth so people can find their own way back. Ekun Bayou has never thirsted again. Children grow up hearing of Adun and BC the way they hear of familiar gods. But the old ones know they were never gods, just people who loved, who envied, who erred, and who forgave. Only humans can turn guilt into miracle once they dare look into their own hearts. Tonight the moon is bright again. The ancient well is full. Its surface mirrors the starred sky like a giant glass. A child leans over and cries out, "I see two people smiling." His mother only smiles, lays a finger to her lips, and hushes him. That's Adun and her sister. They're still watching over us. The child's laugh mingles with the water's voice and travels far. The Duma glitters, curves around the village, flows on without end, like the story that will be told and retold through every generation. And in every drop, in every breath of wind, you can still hear the river whisper, "Never let your heart run dry." Because when the water leaves, what remains inside a person is nothing but light. The water returned to Ekun Bayou, and with it, life itself came back. But the greatest gift the river left behind was not the coolness on skin, not the rice sprouting, the fish swimming, or the rain falling. It was the lesson about the human heart. For some droughts do not come from the sky, but from hearts that have forgotten how to love. Adun, the golden-scaled mermaid, has gone, yet her story has never vanished. It dissolved into every drop of water, blended into every song beneath the moon. She taught people that water can be lost, but mercy must never be allowed to run dry. BC, the sisters scarred by jealousy, also found redemption, not through magic, but through the courage to look at her own wrongs and let the water wash them clean. Even today, if you pass through Ekun Bayou on a moonlit night, pause at the ancient well. Listen. You might hear the lap of water, a distant song, or simply the beat of your own heart. And then you will understand. Every person carries a Duma river inside, where, if we only learn to forgive, the water will flow again. Thank you for staying with me until the very last moment of the voice of the well in the heart of the night. If you felt any warmth, any awakening, or even just a fleeting gentleness from this river, please hit subscribe, give it a like, and share this story with your friends and family all across America. Let them hear the river's whisper too, that forgiveness is the only path that brings us back to ourselves. And before you go, drop a comment and tell me, where are you listening from right now, and what time is it there? Tonight, the Duma still flows, and who knows, maybe the water where you are is telling the same story in its own quiet voice.